go to Fiona. Oh, okay, that was exciting. There we go. So I said recording in progress. So I'm going to go to Fiona first, and I'm going to start kind of the discussion really with kind of thinking, what was your favourite stat from the report? What surprised you most, or kind of what shocked you most? Something that we can kind of have a bit of a stat and a chat about.
Thanks, Heidi. Great question. I think always difficult to find a favourite stat when some of them are really still horrify me. So it's difficult for me to say that they're my favourite, but the ones that resonate, I guess, with me the most, I always hone in on the discrimination part, the bullying and the harassment, because I think that is so prevalent constantly. It comes up time and time and time again, and it's something that as a community we still haven't got a hold on, or haven't really made enough of a dent in for my liking. So I'm always horrified to see that women are experiencing discrimination or harassment significantly more, and that they're witnessing it significantly more. I'd really like to know whether they're witnessing it more because they're aware of it more and because they are able to identify it, or whether it's just happening more in the present. I'm not quite sure whether that, of course, with all statistics, there's always a story behind them that we'd be keen to explore. So I think that's the part that I am never surprised to see, but hate to see when I see it, because I think there's not enough progress. That is too slow for my liking. The bit that surprised me, I think, more is that 1 in 5 mothers have experienced pregnancy or childcare related discrimination, and 1 in 100 fathers. The disparity between that seemed huge. And I think what I'd like to know is, I know that, you know, when you look at the data a bit more, you can understand there's probably more of a story to tell there, and of the numbers of women that are responding to the surveys and things. But I think there perhaps could be more done around shared parental leave, or the responsibilities of fathers, recognising that childcare role from all aspects. I think if we look at it more intersectionally, you know, it's not just, you know, the same-sex relationships, and there's so much more to it that I think that could still be done in that area. That I think that it really shocked me that just 1 in 100 fathers. I thought that seemed like a crazy statistic for me. But those are some of my early thoughts, along with some of the very interesting report. I mean, I've really loved reading it. Thank you so much for doing it, because there's so much to run with.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And I think, again, on the parental side of things, it's hard because we don't have some of those follow-up questions we want to ask. We've been able to chat to some women who are happy to have conversations with us after, but again, I think next time, if this happens again, we've got so many more questions that we can kind of follow up with to try and pull out some more information. I'm going to go next to Alys to say, what was your favourite, most interesting stat in the report?
Thanks, Heidi. I guess for me, like the figure that came out around, you know, the 29% of this UK space, you know, workforce is female, and although that was a much higher number, I guess, than what I was anticipating, I think the thing that really got me is when you dig into that a little bit more deeply and realise that actually, you know, there's still a large percentage of women within the UK space workforce who are working in administrative or HR sort of roles. So it's, although that's a fantastic number, for me personally, I'd be more interested in understanding the number of specific, you know, engineering female sort of employees within companies, because I think really that's where we're still missing that diversity, that balance. And so I guess for me, it was not a nice surprise to see the figure, and yet once you dig a bit more deeply into it, you know, we're still lacking massively in the sort of representation of women within the engineering teams within space in the UK.
Absolutely, and can I just apologise, it's Alys, not Alys, so sorry for...
That's all right, don't worry.
Silly there. But yeah, I think it's a really good point. It's something that we see when we see that more of the cohort of aerospace engineers seem to be women going into space, but we still are lacking this representation in engineering and science in general, which is something that we probably have to tackle. So can I go to Claudia next to share your stats of the day, I guess?
So, I mean, first of all, it's very difficult because they're all very interesting. Also, it's very difficult because Fiona and Alys pretty picked up what I wanted to talk about. So I always have this fantastic, like, it's great to be last because it means I can touch on something else. I think the one about the fact that women are more likely to be encouraged to join thanks to the support of a teacher. I feel like there's something important there, how very early support is crucial. And if I could ask a follow-up question, I might also want to ask these people about how their family felt about it, how their community felt about it, because we know that there's still an issue in education being gendered and in girls not feeling as confident in technical subjects for a number of reasons. Therefore, I very well remember how I felt like when I said I wanted to be a physicist, I wanted to be a space scientist and similar things. And it does take a lot to overcome the expectation that it's going to be too hard for you. So it'd be very interesting to see how important the community support is to overcome that kind of social prejudice and expectation, because I have a feeling that those people also had some element of community support. I would be interested in looking at that.
I mean, I think that's a really interesting point around the support and the education, because we actually find that there's a higher percentage of girls who are privately educated than boys, and private schools tend to have that better career support. So there's definitely things that we can pull out which make quite interesting stories. So thank you all for sharing your favourite stats, or kind of, it's hard to say favourite when some of them are negative, but hopefully most interesting stat. The next kind of questions I'm going to ask, we can kind of jump in a bit more on, so anyone can join in to answer things, but I'm going to go to Alys first to start us off here. And this is around recruitment of women or girls into the space sector. So in the report, we kind of found that the space sector seems to be doing a good job at recruiting female physics and engineering graduates. So it's essentially what we're saying here is that we see a similar number of engineering and physics undergraduates who are women. That percentage is kind of almost replicated in the workforce. This is what seems to be apparent. Doesn't obviously tell the full story having just those stats. But if it does kind of appear to be doing a good job, why do we think it's the case? Is it a kind of chance that we just surveyed people at the right time? Is the space sector doing a good job at recruiting women? So I'm going to start with Alys, and then we can all jump in on those questions afterwards.
I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, I guess, yeah, in some sense, there is also going to be an element of chance. I think, you know, more and more we are putting on space camps, and we are, you know, having more influential female figures in the space industry who are, you know, being portrayed in the media, who are doing, you know, STEM reach out, all of these kind of things. So I think, you know, we are seeing a change in the younger cohorts of people moving more into these STEM subjects, which is, you know, we now have a larger pool of female candidates coming up in the sort of younger age groups. I think as a representation of how we're actually doing with recruiting, I mean, I can talk from my own experience. I've worked in both in-house and agency, and the proportion of female candidates who get placed has definitely increased over the 10 years that I've been working in the industry. It's much more, you know, much more a regular occurrence now to have a female put into a post. But even so, the percentage is really, you know, it's nowhere near 50-50. I think so for Astroscale as a company, I had a look at some figures, you know, what our representation is. And, you know, in the UK, in our office here, 23% of our workforce is female or identifies as female, and 33% of our senior management team is female. So I personally think like that, you know, I feel like that's quite a good figure from where we were before, you know, a number of years ago. Things are definitely changing. And I think there is a lot to be done from the recruitment side of things with regards to the space industry. I think, you know, we are at risk, I think, a lot of the time of unconscious bias. So, you know, is there a place for anonymization of, you know, CVs when they're put in for a position, so that the normally predominantly male engineering staff, in, you know, if we're looking at those kind of positions, don't have an unconscious bias just simply by reading someone's name, you know, and that's similar to, you know, looking at where someone's from, or, you know, their ethnicity, for example. So I think that's definitely something that could be looked at. In the report, it talked about how women are much more, you know, heavily influenced by role models or teachers or things like that. So I think, you know, that as I said, like, that's already improving. So it's encouraging people more into the industry. I think they need to be given more opportunity. And I also think that, you know, we need to look at our companies and how it is for a woman to actually come in and work in our company. How welcome do they feel? You know, how understood are their issues compared to their male compatriots, and how are they made to feel about that? Is there a, you know, is there a sort of a suit for the clean room that's going to fit them, and they're not going to look like they're wearing like an oversized, like a child, you know, a kid wearing adult's clothing, this kind of thing. Like, I think it's really important on those day-to-day aspects of really, you know, trying to understand like how we can encourage women into our companies and make them feel comfortable and safe, and to retain them as well. There seems to be a lot of women who come in and leave for various reasons, that maybe they have children, and then they don't feel like coming back, or yeah, there's lots of different things I think that can be considered. I'd say there is a lot of work being done. I can say within Astroscale, the company, and myself, you know, trying to improve processes to make them more accessible to women. So, for example, women are less likely to apply for a job if they don't think that they can do all the things on the job specification, you know. So, like, how do we reduce the essential requirements down to less so that they feel more able to actually apply for those jobs? These kind of like small things that actually can make a big difference to the kind of applicants that we get specifically for women.
I think there's some really interesting points there. I mean, I know we've done some work around trying to look at recruitment toolkits and look at how company adverts actually are presented, and often they're terrible, aren't they? And you can really see why some sort of gendered language might put people off. Or so that's what kind of we've been having a look at as well. I can see, Claudia, you've got your mic unmuted, so I'm going to let you jump in as well.
I was exactly going to say that something that because someone in the chat is asking, what's the effect of writing job descriptions in a certain way? And I wanted to touch on this point of gendered language. So even though, I mean, I have spotted an ad from a very prominent space employer last year that only had male pronouns. So that was very clearly gendered. It was, yeah. I called them out on Twitter and they did change it. So that was a score for me. But there's also a very less obvious aspect of gender coded advert. So yeah. For example, I had fun with this by inputting my own job description in the form, and it turned out it was heavily female gender coded, which because I work in science communication and I work with kids quite a lot, there's already sort of an expectation that the role is going to be covered by a woman in a certain way. So you use words such as enthusiastic, dedicated, passionate. These adjectives are female coded. If you look at things like analytical, detail-oriented, leader, that kind of line will go more towards a male coded ad. And even though you think you're doing everything perfectly, as I said, I've done it with my own job description, and I wasn't pleasantly surprised that I would fit into that mold so perfectly. So do take a step back and look at those things. And also, when you write your job descriptions, do you advertise the benefits that your company gives to your employees? What is your parental leave policy? And I'm deliberately saying parental leave and not maternity leave here. What are the perks for childcare or other dependents, because we know that the women still are acting as carers disproportionately more than men. So it's important to make sure that men also take an active role in that care labor. But in the meantime, we have to keep supporting women that in doing that. What is your policy on social events? Because we know that that is something that drives women away a lot. So you need to make sure not only to present the role in a way that doesn't deter people of minority. Someone in the chat was pointing out that, yes, it's true. People of minority do have some sort of confidence gap in saying, if I see 15 requirements and I'm missing 2, I think I'm not going to be good enough. And I have added the barrier of not seeing anyone that looks like me. So together with that, are you presenting the whole reality of the company as something that is achieving impressive technical endeavors, but also someone that is looking after their own people? Because if you're not, you're missing a trick. And if you're not looking after your own people, please go on and do that stat.
Exactly. No, I completely agree. And I can see that Fiona's unmuted mic. I was wondering if you're going to pick up on things like the bias or other areas. So I'll let you talk about that now.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting. I was agreeing, nodding along with my peers on the panel, absolutely. I think there's some really key points that have been raised. I think Claudia's right in talking about that inclusive culture piece. And, you know, the culture that you're coming into. You can write the most wonderful job advert, but if you're having a terrible time when you're there, it's going to attest to those stats that we've seen in the report about people's experience. And then it speaks to that retention piece about particularly losing women in this case that we're talking about. And we're looking at that, you know, why are women younger in the space sector? Why are they not reaching those senior positions? What's going on there? I think there's a couple of things that you can look at as an organisation, as an employer. I think looking at the shortlisting process, we know that there's evidence to say that if there's only one woman on that shortlisting process, then that she will statistically not get the job. So you need to have a more critical mass. You need to have more than just one woman. If we're looking at 29% women in astrophysics community, that's great. There are phenomenal applicants out there, and it's up to the organisation to go out and work hard to get them. It's not up to, you know, people to find you. I think that something that we've been talking about a lot internally is about looking at debiasing the process versus debiasing the people. It's a very interesting one. We know that unconscious bias training has been well, the government said, no, thank you, we're not doing this anymore. And we know that there's evidence to say that a one-off training doesn't have any effect. And we also know that our processes have inherent bias within them, and we can work hard to remove that. But at some point, you're still faced with a candidate, and you're still going to make assumptions about them at some stage, whether they get through different stages. So it's a very interesting balancing act of trying to debias your process as much as possible. I would recommend the gender decoders that Claudia is talking about. There's many free ones online. It's fascinating. We put our chartership standards through them to really look at all of the criteria and, you know, all of our applications for membership or awards. We always try and get them through the decoders, and it's very interesting to see what comes out. I think some of it it can be quite personal and you agree with, and you think, but I am ambitious. Why is that a male word? And it's really interesting to see what comes up, but it's just what's traditionally associated with and societally recognized. But I think, yeah, some really good tips from the panel there. I think definitely looking at job adverts, definitely looking at recruitment tools. I think looking at where you advertise as well, thinking about how you can reach different communities is really important. Don't just go down really traditional routes that you would assume. Thinking about who you would want to apply and going out and finding them and reaching them and building your own connections is a far better way of waiting for people to find you, I think.
And there's some absolutely great resources out there for advertising to minority groups as well, like Black, British and STEM, I think, have a fantastic network of people who would be brilliant for the job, but so advertising through different networks can be really positive. So just kind of picking up, I think my last point on recruitment at the moment is going to be a bit around kind of targets. Is it at the moment in the sector, so we're on about 29% women overall, about 20 to 22% engineering, kind of physics areas, and then admin, we didn't have any kind of men in senior roles in admin at all. It was almost completely women dominated. But for the sector as a whole, do you think we should have some sort of targets for recruitment? Is that useful, or do you think there should be targets around other things instead? So I'm going to throw that open to anyone who wants to jump in. Or complete silence.
I can go for that. So targets are an interesting one. Targets are always a good idea because you've got to have a direction of where you want to get to. I wouldn't want to set a low target that once you've achieved, you think you've solved it, because that's my biggest fear about targets, that if you say we want 35% and then you say, well, let's leave it there, that's close enough. I think we must always continue to work at these kind of things and continue to keep pushing for progress. I think you're right, we could have targets for everything. I think it's more about having a direction and having a really clear action plan of how you're getting there. I think targets are the way to measure your success, and they are one element of it. But I think the actions and the journey that you go on to get there is probably just as important as the targets you're trying to achieve. That's a bit on the fence, sorry.
Oh, it's a balanced argument, really. I don't know if anyone else wants to answer that quickly before I move on.
So I'm going to, let's say, throw a provocation in there. We live in a country where misogyny can't be made a hate crime because otherwise there'd be too much work for the police force. Are we really okay with, hiring a number of women and then saying, yeah, tick, job done? The two main things I have to say to this, to this kind of argument, okay, we're done with gender, is first of all, misogyny is rife. I don't think I need to say why or when or how or where. Women are not a monolith. So you may be recruiting a 35% women in your company. Fantastic, amazing. Who are those women? What ethnic backgrounds are they from? What is their disability status? Do they choose to disclose their disability status? How is your company doing as a matter of openness towards LGBTQIA plus employees? Because if you just set a number, you might be recruiting women that are all from a very homogeneous group. And I don't think that would be really a victory. So it's not a matter of how many women do we have, but who are they? And also how comfortable are they? Are you retaining them? Because if I take lots of nice little hiring boxes and those women leave after 2 years and leave the sector or go to another job because they want to run away from your workplace, I don't think that just the target of how many women you're hiring captures that very particularly well. And also like intersectionality. If I'm hiring all these women, but how am I making sure they are really included? How am I making sure that all the different facets of their identity are being taken into consideration? My experience as a non-native immigrant English speaker will be very different from a white British woman, will be very different from a British woman of South Indian descent, will be very different from a trans woman. All this, we all fit in some way into the woman box, but our lives are very different. And very last thing is, you can't solve gender until you've also solved the non-binary, the presence of non-binary people. They exist. So gender equality is not reached until gender minorities are also completely, fully acknowledged and recognized and included.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. So I don't know if Alys, you want, sorry, I'm such an idiot and you can completely, I'm being absolutely terrible. So Alys, I don't know if you wanted to add anything or if I'm going to move on to the next one and just manage to butcher everyone's name. Okay, sounds like you're good in the moment, fab. So apologies for that. I'm going to move on to our next kind of question that we've been thinking of asking as well, and it's around education, because as Claudia, you mentioned earlier, you're kind of your point around teachers and schools being important. I think this is probably where we can get Fiona and Claudia's kind of input on the kind of early career side, and Alys as well on what you're seeing through the kind of recruitment side. It seems like teachers and schools are a massive influence on getting women into space. It's that personal connection. It's actually about being at that summer camp or meeting people, having that network and having inspiring teachers. Is it the space sector's responsibility to help with teachers, to help STEM uptake? I might start with, actually, Alys, would you like to go first? And then I'm going to pass over to the others.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if we're looking to encourage women into our sector, and I think the thing is that women bring something different that we don't, different ideas, different creativity, different points of view. And I think there's actually evidence to show that companies who have more women in their companies are actually more profitable. So if you're hoping to be a successful private company, that's definitely a reason to encourage more women into your company. But yeah, those ideas that are missing, that creativity, I just think it's we need to have that in our companies. And if we want to encourage that, if there is an obvious statistic that shows that women are specifically more influenced by teachers, summer camps, inspirational people, of course it's our place to sort of encourage that. I think the STEM program, I mean, I was a STEM ambassador for a while. I'm a recruiter ultimately. I'm not even someone who can inspire in the same way that a female engineer or a physicist can. I think if as individuals, I think we all have a part to play. I think as companies we also have a part to play. I think yes, supporting schools and helping them with their programs and things, but actually also to go in ourselves and take a little bit of time out of our day-to-day work to actually go in and talk or run events or whatever it looks like. I absolutely believe that if we think this is an important thing as a sector, that it's something that we have to invest in.
Absolutely, thank you. Fiona, I just wonder if you've got some Institute of Physics background that you could probably bring to this.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, at the IOP, my goodness, we've been working with education for, I think at least 30 years, trying to sort out the gender imbalance in physics at the very minimum, and looking at more wider characteristics and beyond. So yes, I would agree it is the space sector's responsibility, but I would also put that on everything around education at that early age. I'd put that on the government. I'd put that on organisations going into schools. I'd put that on parents. I'd put that on families. I'd put that on communities, put that on the media, put it on social media. I'd put that responsibility on everything, because I think if you're thinking about education and really understanding the importance of it, you'll recognise all of the influences around young people at that time. And we're doing a campaign at the moment, the Limitless campaign, that you might have noticed, that's about all the different aspects of influences that young people face that help to change and shape their minds into those decision making. And I think the more that the space sector can do is brilliant, and the more that they can lobby and ask the government to do, and ask Ofsted, and ask all of those things that affect young people's decision making is really key. So yes, I think it's on the space sector, but I think it's broader than that. I think it's a shared responsibility. I think I'm talking to Heidi, who may have dropped out, who has dropped out from my screen, so I can't see her for now. But Claudia, I didn't know if there's anything that you wanted to add at all.
Joseph is maybe trying to say something. You're muted, I think, or at least I can't hear you. So okay, I'll jump in just to cover for the tech mishaps. I certainly agree that the space sector can definitely do a lot. I would like to give a reference to Destination Space, which was a very large informal education program that started when Team Peak went to space, and the power that having an astronaut in space has for inspiring young people is absolutely incredible. That program has reached a few million people in its first couple of years, and it's since then been going on with the support of SCFC and other important partners. I will also say, though, that inspiration through education is not enough, that we need to create a welcoming, supportive, inclusive environment, because I can go out and inspire 3,000 girls a day on how great a career in space is. And then if all these girls decide to take a career in physics, engineering, whatever, and join a space company, and they find themselves undervalued, discriminated against, harassed, I'm not really doing them a great service. I always make a point about being honest on what the reality of the sector is, because ultimately it's not their job to solve a problem that we have created. It's not the next generation's job to get into an unfriendly environment for them, because we want to see lots of, happy faces and happy adverts for ourselves. I think we should do better than that. So I will always be a great advocate for education. I'm never going to stop touting the horn, but I'm also never going to stop demanding accountability from the sector in itself. Heidi, you're muted.
I was going to say, I'm very sorry. It seemed like my Wi-Fi dropped for a second, but I came in when you were in the middle of an absolutely fantastic answer. So honestly, couldn't agree more with that whole idea around you can't just get people in to a sector where they might not feel welcome, and it is around remaining accountable. So apologies for missing a couple of minutes of other people's probably fantastic discussion. I have absolutely no doubt. I think we're going to very quickly have to move on in a second to kind of moving to education and Earth observation, because we don't have a huge amount of time left in the panel. I'm aware we don't want to run until 2 o'clock to give everyone a chance to at least have a cup of tea before their next inevitable Zoom call. But kind of moving on to Earth observation, we find that women seem to very slightly, in terms of just a few percentages, but what seem to work in Earth observation, in environmental intelligence, in areas which are maybe viewed as having more benefit to life on Earth. I think this links quite well into education around actually, do we need to do a better job in educating people in general, but also women about the benefits that space can bring to life on Earth? And do you think this will increase the number of women in the sector? Again, obviously we want to have a welcoming sector when they get there, but what are your views on the Earth observation angle and the benefits to life on Earth angle?
I'll very quickly link with, this is something that someone was also pointing towards in the chat, that women from the global south are not feeling particularly encouraged to join the space sector because of the links that the sector has with the military and defense and weaponization. I mean, maybe this is wishful thinking here, but wouldn't it be great if space really devoted its resources to actually looking after Earth and trying to distance itself from the colonizing intents that it did have underlying when the sector started, and started to demilitarize some of as many as facilities as possible, really, and really looked after the communities that are mostly affected by climate change, and really started looking after the communities that are mostly affected by all sorts of natural disasters, earthquakes, droughts. Earth observation can do so much for these communities. And I think Earth observation actually desperately needs these amazing community leaders in the global south, so many of which are women, because they have a unique knowledge of the fauna that lives there, of the ecosystem, of the different support structures that the community can offer. So I think that actually what the space sector should do here is to listen to what these communities have to say, because that is the only way that we can fully accomplish the aim that Earth observation and the space sector has, which is to look after our planet.
I think that's absolutely correct. It's especially something we see around the issues with mega constellations and satellites, actually, we haven't listened to the voices of many Indigenous communities before imposing this, that, and the other. So it's not just Earth's observation. Fiona, I wonder if you've got any opinions on it.
So something that I was thinking about with this with regards to education is the need for specialist physics teachers. I think we hear so often, time and time again, that people are being taught physics by people who aren't specialists in physics. And I think, you know, sometimes you hear about geography teachers taking on physics lessons and chemistry and biology and patching up that gap. And I think if we're really focusing on education and that kind of thing, I think it's actually having teachers with an actual specialist understanding and supporting that, then you would have better education from the beginning and better understanding of the nuances of the different disciplines and the sub-disciplines, and that greater sort of that tangible reach of where you can go with your physics degrees, and understanding what it all means and the different routes and the different aspects. I think that passion really comes through if you've got someone that's passionate about physics, and that inspiring thing. And you can see from the report and the data, you can see how young women, young girls, trans women are inspired by this, and you can see that it's from those networks and those peers and the influence that teachers have. And I think if you're looking to unlock that potential, you need to start with getting specialist physics teachers in, and start and even getting more than one in a school, because it's a lot of pressure for one person. I think that's probably where I would go with it.
Yeah, I think that links back to earlier as well, the responsibility the space sector has to increasing people in STEM, increasing women in STEM. We need to make sure there's people who can talk about these things in schools themselves. Alys, I don't know if you want to chime in as well, because I'm aware we've only got a really short amount of time left.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I guess I offer a slightly unique perspective, because I'm not an engineering person. I'm not a scientist. I'm not, you know, I didn't get into this because I love space. I mean, I love space now, but, you know, ultimately I did a social sciences degree, and I ended up by chance working in the satellite industry, and then, you know, moved into space and have forged a career in that through choice. But you know, when people ask me what it is that I do, and I don't really have friends who are scientists or engineers or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I'm a recruiter in the space industry, and their face is blank. And they're like, well, why would you do that? And I'm like, well, you know, it's a fascinating industry. There's so many benefits. And, you know, the technology, when it's, you know, developed, the things that we actually, the benefits on Earth, and you start talking to them, they're like, oh yeah, actually that's a really good point, because actually I just thought about, you know, outer space and Mars and all that kind of stuff, and it doesn't feel like something that they can relate to. And when you start talking to them about what the benefits are and the, you know, the technological advancements that have come from space technology, they start to get it, you know, communications, Earth observation. And I do honestly think that, I think if it was in some ways reframed so people could understand what those benefits are, and I think, you know, more and more we have a progressive younger generation coming up who care about the environment, who care about the planet, who care about people. I think if we can actually get space into their mindset as something that just, it can be relatable to something on Earth, and yes, there are incredible things to be learned that are not on our planet, I think you may start to draw more and more people in who maybe have that slightly different viewpoint, you know, from a younger age. Perhaps it's not necessarily, you know, they could, I honestly think that it would start to draw people in who maybe have never even considered. I never thought about doing science and maths A-level GCSEs, and I think had someone, you know, appealed to that more, I don't know, that part of me that, you know, is caring and, you know, wants to do good things for people, I may have been drawn into it, you know, had I believed I was capable, and perhaps that was something I wasn't encouraged about either. But yeah, I think it's a way that we could draw different people in who perhaps aren't already really interested in science and maths at a young age.
I absolutely agree. So I'm going to have to end it there now, and thank you so much for your amazing answers. I'm going to pass both to Joseph and Anya, who will actually be chairing the session next week, just to kind of close it out. So I'm going to mute my mic and camera for the rest of the session, but I want to say a huge thanks to the panelists, because I've really enjoyed hearing all of your opinions, and you've all been absolutely amazing. So thank you. Over to Joseph and Anya.
Hi, can you hear me this time? Fantastic. So thank you so much to our fantastic panel for this really, really interesting discussion, and to Heidi for chairing it all. You can read all our reports on our website, that's spaceskills.org. And you'll also find there our space recruitment toolkit, which has lots of information about a lot of what Alys, Fiona and Claudia have said around writing more inclusive job adverts and debiasing the recruitment process, as well as links to things like the gender decoder and other useful resources from other people. Join us at the same time next week when we'll be discussing gender discrimination and the pay and promotion gap with Nafisa Dajna, Anya O'Brien and Hayley Evers-King. Thank you very much for joining us and bearing with us through some technical difficulties, and have a lovely rest of your day.